Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. It is so great to be here with all of you. Today, we are going to be doing a deep dive on Pluto. So, Pluto is absolutely the highlight of the astrology right now, but Rick is going to tell us about why that is probably true all the way into 2024. So, no matter when you're tuning into this, we're going to be talking about Pluto in general, and then we're going to be highlighting some of the current events and future events that are making Pluto really prominent in all of our lives right now, both individually and collectively. And Rick, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Nice to be here with you. We just mentioned before we went live, I'm out on Cape Cod on an East Coast lecture tour and somewhat peppered with a little vacation time. I have a little bit of the sun because I was at the beach today, and
Nice.
it's nice to be here.
Nice. I love your traveling ways. I mean, I love how you just like pick up and go for months at a time.
Yeah,
It's
now if I could just figure out a way to pick up and go and not take my work with me, I'd be all set.
All right. Well, we'll give you some time off, Rick, if you want.
Thanks. Thanks, but no one else will.
Oh,
I don't know how to tell you this, Amanda, but you're not the only woman in my life.
no.
Yeah. Oh my God. Before we get going, I just want to say that you said we're doing a deep dive on Pluto. Actually, we're doing a deep dive about Pluto on Earth, but I'm just being technical. The deep dive is not on Pluto.
Thank you.
But when it comes to doing a deep dive about Pluto, we need to acknowledge the fact that Pluto is the Mariana Trench of the planets. In other words, that's the Mariana Trench is the deepest point on all of Earth. It's the deepest point on Earth in the Pacific Ocean. And to do a deep dive on any other planet or about any other planet, now I need to watch how I say it each time. To do a deep dive about the subject of any other of the planetary archetypes does not compare to doing a deep dive about Pluto, because Pluto itself is the archetype of deep.
Mm, yes. All right. Well, and we're going to be talking about how Pluto is inviting greater evolution, transformation, how Pluto plays out in regards to power in our lives and in the world. So, why are you especially keen to be talking about Pluto right now?
Well, there's right now, meaning today, tomorrow, and yesterday. There's right now, meaning 2020, July of 2023. There's right now, meaning 2022, 23, 24 as a sweep, because Pluto is highlighted in each of those separately, and of course, when you add them all together, it does pack quite a wallop. And so there's a few different levels of Pluto. Remember, we're still coming off of a 20 to 2015, actually 2012 to 2015 square of Uranus to Pluto, which was the crisis and conflict about all those things that went down at the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the mid-60s. So that's a Pluto setup right there, because Uranus aligns with Pluto really only every other century or so, every century or two, depending on the speed of Pluto, which varies significantly. So that's the first thing. And the square of Uranus to Pluto in the 2010s, 2012 to 2015, the high focus of that was potent all around the planet. But that was immediately followed up by the first Saturn-Pluto conjunction in its own sign, Capricorn, in Saturn's own sign, Capricorn, in January of 2020. And of course, we know this January, or the 2020 story, not only with Saturn lining up with Pluto, but also Jupiter lining up with Pluto, and its relationship to the whole, process that was, tied to, first the Wuhan virus, whatever we want to call that whole thing that resulted in quarantine and a somewhat of a shutdown of business as normal around the planet. And so that was the next piece of Pluto, which was rare because the last time that Saturn joined Pluto in Capricorn was the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. I mean, that happened within a month or so of Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther nailing the theses on the wall of the church in Württemberg, that Germany, that basically started the breakaway from the absolute power of the Pope or of the Catholic Church. So these are all things that are feeding now. And now in 2023, we're basically experiencing a very rare square from the nodal axis to Pluto that's happening at the same moment in time that the nodes are changing signs from fixed Taurus Scorpio into cardinal Aries Libra. And although the nodes will square Pluto about every 9 or 10 years, because the nodal axis is about an 18-year cycle, which means halfway through it, the nodes will have flipped. Pluto will have moved a little bit on. But the fact that this is doing this at the time that they are changing signs is incredibly rare. And then you add to that the fact that Venus recently opposed Pluto, and now at the moment that Pluto is making the square in mid July, here we are around July 18th to the 28th, in that period of time, not only is Pluto squaring the nodes, but the Sun and Mercury are opposing Pluto, meaning they're squaring the nodes from the other side. So we have different levels of the importance of Pluto. One is today, one is this week, one is this month, one is this year, and one is the sweep of 2010 all the way up through 2025 or so. So it's a big picture kind of dive that we're taking.
Mm. And Rick, there's people asking, like, if their Pluto's in Libra, or if they have the same nodal axis, if they're Aries Libra nodal axis, is this especially pronounced for people with those placements?
Like any movement of planets through the sky, if they're making an exact conjunction, opposition, square, for that matter, trine, sextile, for that matter, even if you're like me and look at quintiles and septiles and semisquares and sesquids, whatever aspect a planet or an event in the sky is making, if it does interact with your chart, it kind of indicates that your name is on the event, that there's some personalization. But oftentimes we miss the fact that the mathematical halfway point between two planets in our chart, called midpoints, that also is an active point, and they're not as obvious. So sometimes the transiting planet, in this case Pluto, at 28, 29 degrees of Capricorn, 1 degree of Aquarius, as it moves forth and back and forth and back and forth. If you have planets at any of those points, yes, it's going to impact you. It's likely to impact you more. And it depends upon how that planet in your chart aspects other planets in your chart, how it's integrated. But again, there are many other ways for an event to impact your natal chart. And even just noting where in your natal chart is the cusp between Capricorn and Aquarius, because that's where Pluto is, or where is the cusp in your chart between Aries, between Aries and Taurus, or between where is my brain, between Libra and Scorpio, or between, for that matter, because it's the points and the opposite points, between Cancer and Leo, because that's opposite Pluto in the sky, which is where the Sun and Mercury are here in mid-July. But again, what we're talking about is much larger. It's a larger perspective than just that. So the thing is to look in your chart and see where these points are, where does the axis of these points land in what houses in your chart? Because even if you don't have a planet at those points, Pluto is still moving through a particular house in your chart. And that can be an aspect, or that can be a transition that'll last for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, depending upon the mathematical size or width of your house and the speed of Pluto, which is relatively fast right now.
Mm. And I think this will lead us into the deep dive about Pluto, not on Pluto, but about Pluto.
There we go.
My question is, if you're seeing that it's hitting certain like sensitive points in your chart, and or if you're just looking at what house it's passing through, what is the invitation? Like, what does that mean? How do we interpret that?
So this is like an invitation from a mafioso don. It's Pluto basically when it makes the transit. It's an invitation that you can't refuse, and the more that you refuse it, the harder it's going to be on you. The idea of Pluto is, as far as we know, there's always new planets being discovered that are farther and farther away from the sun, that deepen and widen our perspective on life and death and everything. But remember, for thousands of years, Saturn was the limit. And even though modern astrologers use planets that are farther out than Pluto, whether it's Eris or Sedna or Makemake or other objects that are way, way, way out there, Pluto is kind of the most distant planet that we astrologers seem to have integrated into our regular work. I mean, there are others that are in that process. But as such, Pluto represents those things that we're still striving to understand. Because as each new outer planet is discovered, there's a process where we have to then assimilate that archetype into our consciousness. And Pluto's archetype, Pluto is Latin for Hades, which is Greek for hell. And so Pluto is sometimes referred to as the Lord of the hell realms. But here I have to do what I call, and for those people who have listened to me teach a lot, you've heard me say this probably in almost the identical words. When we talk about Pluto as the Lord of the hell realms, we have to clarify the fact that we're not limiting our understanding to hell to the Judeo-Christian tradition, where hell is a rather nasty place where you get punished for being a human, born of original sin, you've fallen from the grace of the divine proportion. And Pluto is the price we pay because we have to die. And when we die, we haven't lived a perfect life, well, then we get to spend eternity in hell. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the more complex version of that which is hell, meaning that which everything is not apparent on the surface, everything that's hidden, everything that's underground, everything that's unconscious. And as we now know, unconsciousness doesn't exist in the brain. Unconsciousness exists in every cell of our body. That unconsciousness is dispersed. And in fact, it may even be wider than that, because consciousness probably doesn't only begin and end in our body. Consciousness actually goes out to the reaches of the cosmos. So as we talk about Pluto, we have to understand that if we're going to do a deep dive, we have to go deep enough and wide enough that we move beyond our normal realms of perceptible experiences. This is not about the five senses of touch, taste, smell. What am I missing? Whatever they are, hearing and something. There's a fifth one. Seeing is believing. Well, with Pluto, seeing is not believing, because believing has to do with experience, and we may experience something that is extra sensory, beyond the five senses. And when Pluto works, it works so slowly. We can see change happen. If lightning strikes a tree and sets a forest on fire, that's instantaneous. We can see it. If Neptune creates change and creates a swell in the ocean and a tidal wave, it's not as incredibly sudden as lightning, but we still can perceive it because it happens within our range of time, of understanding change in time. But if we were to watch the change that a glacier makes as it takes down a forest and maybe even an entire mountain, and we kept looking at it and looking at it and looking at it some more, we would not notice the change because the change occurs at a level that is outside of our normal realm of time. Now, can you imagine trying to surf on a leading edge of a glacier rather than the leading edge of a wave in the ocean? Well, that's why it's so difficult to understand Pluto, because it's beyond our normal perceptions. We can look at the dramatic transformation or metamorphosis that Pluto creates in life, not when we look at the leaves that change on a tree as it gets to be the season of autumn and the liquids begin to dry up and the leaves change colors and then they turn crispy and then they die. And then they come back in the spring. That's change, but that's not metamorphosis. That's a change that occurs cyclically every year. But because Pluto takes 250 years to make one cycle, we don't ever get to experience the entire cycle of change. So typically, a half to 2/3 of the Pluto cycle remains invisible, even if we're paying attention to everything that's going on. Pluto represents one-time changes that can't be reversed. It's like a caterpillar metamorphosizing, or is it metamorphosing? I'm not sure which it is, but not just changing, but completely transforming into a butterfly. What happens to the caterpillar? The caterpillar technically dies, but something doesn't die because when the caterpillar goes into the stage of inside the chrysalis in the cocoon, I mean, its bones and eyes disintegrate and melt, and it just turns into this pool of gunk. And yet something in that pool of gunk still has life and electrical sparks that kind of connect and make new connections, and a butterfly is created that has nothing in appearance to do with the caterpillar, but there's some sort of continuity. And this is really what Pluto represents. It represents those changes in our lives where everything that we thought was us, just like the caterpillar thought everything was the caterpillar, everything that we thought was us individually changes. It's like the person who spends 20 years of their life practicing to be an Olympic figure skater and then has an accident that breaks their ankle in a way that can't be repaired enough that they'll never skate again. And the entire identity or self-identity of that person was tied up in this idea of who they were as this figure skater. And the person goes on to become an engineer and learns how to create some new bridge that's never been built before and makes a contribution that's totally different to what their original idea of their self-identity was. We all have these experiences that happen to us, whether it's the loss of a parent or the changing of something within our living situation, or some sort of illness. I mean, often we note these things through trauma, but it's not the only way we get them. But they're things that we can't change and we have to respond to. And often these things take not just weeks or months or even a year or so, like a serious Saturn transition. Often Pluto transitions can take a decade or so to fully unfold. And so the Pluto is about the real deep things. Pluto is associated with death because hell is associated with death, but it's not necessarily, well, it's not necessarily our death. It can be the death of something or someone else in our world. And it's also not necessarily associated with physical death. I recall William Blake, who wanted as his epitaph, he wanted on his gravestone to say, William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. You know, we all go through a death experience every time someone says no to us, every time we have a disappointment, every time we experience a loss. And Pluto is about the process, not of death, but of death and then being in a space and then rebirth, because nothing happens to us that's new without something old falling away or being pulled away. Amongst my astrology friends, and I think I saw Gail on the line, Gail, my longtime friend, editor, and sometimes partner in astrology crime, not that there's any real crime committed. We sometimes refer to Pluto as Roto-Rooter, because when Roto-Rooter, in the United States, for those listening in other countries, Roto-Rooter is a plumbing franchise that pretty much wherever you live, you can call Roto-Rooter if your drains are clogged. Then they come in with their special equipment and they clean the shit out of your drains. Doesn't matter what's there, Roto-Rooter makes it go away. I think there was an old quip in the Roto-Rooter, something called Roto-Rooter, and away go troubles down the drain. Well, the problem is that when that happens in our life, Roto-Rooter or Pluto doesn't take any prisoners. Anything that's in the way has got to go. And so, in a way, Pluto isn't always apparently friendly, although there's nothing bad about Pluto. It's just part of a process of cleaning out the the drains, the septic tank, the shit, because really Pluto is the planet of elimination, but elimination has a purpose, and that purpose is to create the health of that which has eliminated the toxins. So, and there's another aspect of Pluto that's very important, because Pluto, as the lord of the hell realms, is always considered to be down. It's underground. Now we know in modern psychology that Pluto, as the realms of the unconscious, is not just down directionally, it's in, because it's within our own mind where we hold our hell realms, our unconscious, those things which are not on the surface, but they do have power. And in fact, one of the great understandings or edicts of modern psychology that come from both Freud, Jung, and other dynamic psychologists is when something is hidden, it has more power over us than once the light is shined on it. That's why we do therapy, is to shine the light in the darkness of those things that we don't see, those things which are buried, those things which are in denial, those things which are hidden, those things which are unconscious, whether we're aware of hiding them, that's called suppression, or whether we're totally unconscious about what it is that we're hiding, that's called repression. And so the point here is that Pluto being underground, it's hard to fully understand. By the way, Pluto also is associated with wealth. And when I say wealth, I don't mean the millionaire. I don't even mean the person who has $100 million. I mean immense wealth, because Pluto is about underground. And to the ancients, didn't matter how much money you had, you weren't as wealthy as the person who owned the silver mine or the gold mine or the diamond mine or the copper mine or the tin mine. And all of these rare and precious emeralds or rubies or diamonds, all of these things are underground. They're all hidden, but that's where the real wealth is. And let's make the point that more so than any other time in history, the United States, and I would venture even to say the entire planet, is run as a plutocracy. We hear that word, the United States is a plutocracy. What does that mean? It means that it's run not by the ultra wealthy, but by the ultra wealthy who are so wealthy, we can't even see their wealth. Why? Because it's hidden, it's plutonic, it's underground. And what does that mean? It means it wields a huge amount of power, partly because we can't see it. So that's the setup to why Pluto is so important and why Pluto in astrology is so important. Remember, it was Jeff Green's book back in the, I think in the late 60s, maybe early 70s, called Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. That was really the first book that brought Pluto into the realms of astrology from this perspective. And so it's important to understand that we're really the first or second generation of astrologers who have even had this archetype to work with.
Hmm. So, with the current and future transits, I know you want to bring in some about the US Pluto return, and with this emphasis on the square to the nodal axis, and with Venus retrograde, all these things happening, and with this understanding of Pluto, this
Yeah.
the depth, the unconscious, the roto rooter, the things that are hidden. What again? How do we translate that into what's happening in our lives right now? What are we being asked to do right now?
We're being asked to stand up to a very dark and hidden force
Hmm.
that we've seen rise before. I mean, certainly in the history of our planet, there's rarely a time when there isn't a recycling of this energy that, whether you call it, you remember when Pluto was discovered in 1930, planets seem to be discovered at the same time that their energy is having cultural import. Uranus was discovered, around the time of the American and French revolutions, when individual independence was overtaking the concept of royal power, absolute power by family, by genetic inheritance. And when and also the discovery of electricity, because Uranus is electrical in nature, and this was around the time that you had people like Faraday and Hertz and Ben Franklin saying, "Oh my God, lightning is electricity," and Galvani was saying, "Oh my God, the nervous system is electrical." I mean, this was all part of those times. Well, Pluto, discovered in 1930, was somewhat akin to the rise of mass fascism that arose in Germany with Hitler, in Russia with Stalin, in Italy with Mussolini. I mean, it was that kind of absolute power that that is associated with Pluto in general. And I think now, as Pluto is squaring the nodal axis, and as Pluto has been joined by Uranus back in the 60s, where we saw some flourishing of the resistance to that, because Uranus was like the lightning bolt striking the hidden and bringing things out into the open very abruptly and radically. And then during the squares of 2012 to 2015, we had a replay on many of those energies. But what we're seeing in around the world, but certainly in the United States, is not just the rule by the ultra, 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 ultra powerful and rich. That's not new. What's new is, like, video cameras in phones have made things obvious that have been around for a long time, but now everybody's recording them. By the same token, we are seeing Pluto. We are seeing it again and again. People are talking about it, bringing it into the open, and we're seeing it as a struggle of there's been no time in history when the divergence between the average person and the ultra, ultra, ultra wealthy person has been greater. That the ratio of CEO payment, salaries in the United States compared to the worker, is the distortion of that ratio is greater than it's ever been. And again, I'm not here to either create political division or to come up with an idea of how this is solved. All I'm saying is this is the problem, and our facing this hidden power structure, hidden Pluto, power Pluto. This is the call. How do we face this? How do we respond to this totalitarian, potentially, fascistic regime? And I understand, although I certainly and many of us probably share a similar perspective politically. There are people who have a very different political perspective, but what's intriguing is that everyone thinks that the other side are the fascists. So, the problem here is not is not making the divisions more divisive. It's basically trying to figure out a way to combat the allegedly purposeful division or divisiveness by coming together, by finding common cause or by finding common goals, even if how we might want to get there is differently, in being compassionate and finding a way for love. And here we come to Venus, and we can talk about Venus in a few minutes and what this has to do with all this, but using love to overcome hate, or fear, because hate is really, I think, an offshoot of fear. And so on one side of the spectrum, I think we have the sun and Venus shining light. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have Pluto and maybe Saturn in cahoots of somehow, holding that energy back for one reason or another.
Just what you just said made me think this question of who is the real enemy. And since it's something hidden or a force that's hidden, it's probably not your neighbor, your coworker, your sibling, your spouse. It probably is something bigger that we're not even aware of.
I think it was the cartoonist Pogo who said, "We have seen the enemy and it is us."
Right. Although it seems like basically what we're saying with this Pluto thing is it's beyond our five senses perception, whatever this force is. Yeah. And I'm just thinking that, if we are in the microcosm and the macrocosm and it all being this holographic mirror, that finding those places within yourself and all the work on ourselves of where we have things hidden, where we have internal power dynamic struggles, control issues, all these things. At least I'm not saying it's the only thing we can do, but it definitely seems like it would be part of the equation of what we could do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if this was an algebra problem, the solution would be compassion. And I know that's easier to say than to find ways in which to hold that against a force that seems to be evil, that we are afraid of, because because in a way, our media, right, left, center, I don't care what, our media in some way has continued to work everyone into this sense of being afraid of something, of the other, of the opponent, of the future, of AI, of pollution, of global warming. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying any of these things are necessarily unreal. I'm just saying that we get pumped up with, rather than a feeling like there's something we can do about it to engage it and fix the situation. Instead, where our power is minimized and we are told that we should be afraid. And therefore, if we're afraid, then we project hate onto whatever it is that's scaring us, because we don't have any way of facing it. And I think that we do. And I think that as we look around, we can, in fact, see that. We see glimmers. We see, we see pieces of it. And yet we're fighting an uphill battle. In a way, it's like, paddling a rough Class A whitewater rapids river. But instead of shooting the rapids downward, we're actually trying to find our way back to the source of the river upstream. And so that's what it feels like. And sometimes it's just easier, to go home and turn on the TV, to overeat, overdrink, over smoke, over whatever it is that we do, and go into denial and say, nothing I can do about it. But there is. And, and the result of what we do in our individual world. And for those who, know my work outside of Astrology Hub, that I end almost everything that I do with think cosmically, act locally, because astrology is really about thinking cosmically. But if we just think cosmically, who the hell cares? unless we do something with it. And what that is that you could do, or I could do, or he could do, or they could do, that's our job, to figure that out and do something.
What does the nodal axis shift into Aquarius Libra? What does that add?
Aries Libra.
I'm sorry, Aries
Yeah.
Libra. What does that add to the equation? Like, how does that further color this Pluto time we're in?
Well, remember, the nodal axis is in Aries Libra for about 3 years out of every 18 years, 1.5 years, and then 9 years later, 1.5 years again. So it's, although I know astrologers around the globe have been writing a lot about the importance of the nodal axis shift, it's there, but I think that it's subtle enough that that's not the main game. I mean, I do think it's important. And if anything, I think that it being in Aries Libra, the first sign of the zodiac, it emphasizes the dichotomy between me and you. And when I say you, I don't mean you, Amanda. I mean you, everything out there that's contrary to me, everything in here. It emphasizes the Aries self and the Libra, the other. And so in some ways, it exacerbates this crazy bifurcation that planet Earth is going through, more apparently obvious than maybe ever before. It's certainly not a new issue for humanity, but it's one that was predicted by the 20th century thinker, inventor, scientist Bucky Fuller, where he wrote a book called Utopia or Oblivion, where he said that culture would go through increasing waves of synchronization as the electronic media allowed instantaneous, simultaneous coherence of thought, and that we would go through waves of positive, waves of negative, waves of positive, and these waves would continue to get larger and larger until we ended up either in utopia or oblivion. It's a horrific and yet apparently unavoidable truth. And I'm of the belief that we can get to utopia or utopias of some sort. But, you know, the alternate route, oblivion, is not off the map. I mean, it's not as unlikely to the intellectual as it might have been 50 or 100 years ago, or even 20 years ago, for that matter.
So, Rick, you're one of the maybe the only astrologer, but one of the few astrologers that I know who has argued that the U.S. Pluto return wasn't actually when most people thought it was, that it's actually still hasn't happened yet, that it's going to be in 2024. And I know not all of our friends are in the U.S., but just bringing this Pluto theme into this Pluto return, because at least for the United States, that's a big emphasis, which then ripples into the world at large.
Yes, and whether one lives in the U.S. or not, let's face it, the U.S. has a what's the word I'm looking for? An overbearing impact on pretty much, you know, countries around the world, and so there is some import there. And the thing is that if you go back to what most astrologers consider to be the birth of the United States, there's a lot of difference as to the time of day, or even whether it should be the Declaration of Independence or the signing of the Constitution. But most astrologers use the July 4th, 1776 at about 5:10 p.m., which was right in the midst of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And if one looked at that chart, that's sometimes referred to as the Sagittarius rising chart, with the moon in Aquarius and obviously the sun in Cancer at, you know, on July 4th. But if one looks at that chart, one can see that Pluto was at 27, let's say 27.5 degrees of Capricorn, 27 degrees, 33 minutes. And if one wanted to look at the Pluto return. Remember, Pluto, NASA tells us that Pluto's a 248-year orbit. And so if we run a chart for the United States and then run, a computer program and say, tell us when Pluto returns to where it was when the United States was born. Well, Pluto is back at 27 degrees Capricorn, 33 minutes in 2022. And it happened 3 times, on February 20th, July 11th, which we're just about at a year anniversary of, and December 28th. But pretty much it went direct, retrograde, direct over the point at which it was on July 4th, 1776, 3 times in 2022. The problem with that, which is a problem, a greater problem with astrology, and I hate talking about this because I hate talking about things that confuse us as astrologers, and this, I have to say, confuses the hell out of me. But we modern astrologers use what's called the tropical zodiac because of the Earth's wobble, the point at which what rises in the east on the first day of spring varies by 1 degree every 72 years. It slips backwards. This is what creates the 2100-year ages. We are leaving the age of Pisces and entering the age of Aquarius probably in about 100 years. But the point here is that if you look at the birth of the United States as being in 1776, and we know that the orbit of Pluto is 248 years, well, that means that 1776 plus 248 is 2024, not 2022. What gives? And what gives is that in 250 years, the precession of the equinox changes 1 degree every 72 years. So it's about 2.5 degrees different from where it was then. Normally, when we're looking at natal charts over the lifespan of 30, 50, 70 years, that doesn't impact us all that much. It does a bit, and I don't know anyone who's done real research on it, but that's not where I'm going with this. Where I'm going with this is that if you look at the true position of Pluto mapped against the stars, that's called sidereal zodiac, or the sidereal mapping of the stars. The word sidereal means stars. And this is the astrology that is used by Vedic astrologers. This is why your sign changes if you go see a Vedic astrologer. But if you take that 248-year cycle and add it to the 1776 birth chart of the United States, Pluto doesn't complete a full 360-degree run around the sun until February 22nd of 2024. And then because of the retrogradation, it reaches that same point again on July 16th, 2024, and then a third and final time on December 30th, 2024. So it's my contention, and I'm not saying that tropical astrology doesn't work, and I'm not saying that we haven't, I know the double negatives, and I believe that we have, in fact, entered into this phase of what one would imagine a Pluto return to be. I mean, we all lived through a Saturn return, or 2 or even 3 at age, 29, 57, 80, 2 or 3 or somewhere in there. And of course, we live through a solar return once every year on our birthday, but none of us lived through a Pluto return. And yet the United States is in that phase. And what would one expect that to be? Well, one would expect there to be a death and rebirth, a re-envisioning, a metamorphosizing of whatever that was. And so it seems, from a wider perspective, regardless of what political stripes you happen to wear, regardless of what level of assertion or denial you may be in over one of 20 different topics, the fact of the matter is that we're all being faced with this Plutonic roto-rooter, like cleaning all the shit out and everything being exposed, and some sort of process where caterpillars may end up being butterflies. But while the time between the caterpillar's death and the butterfly's birth, it just looks like bleh. There's not a lot to see, and it's hard to tell where we are, where we were, or where we're going, and that's part of where we are right now.
Rick, one of the questions that I remember asking astrologers over and over in 2020 was, how long is this going to last? How long are we in this metamorphosis phase? And from what I'm hearing from you, it's longer than what even a lot of astrologers were saying at that time. But it sounds like at least through 2024. When do you think the butterfly begins to emerge?
Okay, so I'll answer that question in a moment, but before I do, I just want to make sure that we understand that when the butterfly emerges, we don't know what that butterfly is going to be. In other words,
Oh, it's a beautiful orange and black and amazing butterfly.
that's right. Or is it going to be some venomous moth? We don't know. No, I'm serious. And I'm not saying that to strike any more fear than we already have or any more than we need. But having said that, I would suggest that as we move into the phase of Uranus trining Pluto, remember Uranus joined up with Pluto, begin like a new moon, beginning of the cycle, mid 1960s. 65, 66 was when it was exact. Pluto, as Uranus was moving through Aries, Uranus was squaring Pluto in Capricorn, and that was exact 2012, 13, 14, 15. And, you know, that was the Arab Spring and the Occupy Wall Street and the affirmation of global warming and the stimulation of the global client denial. It was also, Ferguson, Missouri, culminating, in all kinds of awareness or media awareness around what we might call, racial disparity or civil rights, and certainly gender issues. In the mid 60s, it was, the Ms. Magazine and Burn Your Bra and the rise of, feminism, at least in that phase. And then at the square, it was the legalization of gay marriage and the blossoming of the gender fluidity that we're dealing with now, or at least becoming more aware of. So all of these things are part of the cycle, and they can be connected to the Pluto-Uranus conjunction of the mid 60s, and then the Pluto-Uranus square of the 2012 to 2015, and then the nodal connection with Pluto, the South Node Pluto conjunction, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction of 2020-ish. And the next major piece beyond this Pluto squaring the nodes is Uranus, as it moves into Gemini, will trine Pluto, having just moved into Aquarius. And I believe it's the Uranus trine Pluto that will lift us out of this stage of being lost in conflict into some stage where where the future will come to us much quicker, and we will realize that we are in it, it's here, we can't resist it, and we're not going to fight it as much. And whether that's good news or bad news, whether that's the underlying archetypal energy of AI saying humans aren't in control anymore, I am, or whether it's the ETs basically landing and saying, you humans have screwed it up one too many times, we're in charge now, or whether it's some technological breakthrough on the energy front that's giving us the immediate ability to sidestep, petroleum, or whether it's a solution to this problem or that problem. I don't know, but I do know that it's going to take until Pluto is trined by Uranus, until Uranus moves into Gemini. And having said that, And that's basically 2026, 25, 26, 27 is when that kind of begins to play out. And what and what I also need to mention, though, is that every 84 years, when Uranus returns to Gemini, the United States has been involved in a war. Now, that doesn't mean we will, and the war can be strictly an information war, which obviously is largely the war that we're already involved in. I mean, if you want people to talk about a potential civil war, the United States is in the midst of a civil war, but it's not being fought with guns, although there may be some of those involved on the periphery. It's being fought by control of thoughts. That is a war, and it is a civil war. And so, but I think that that's going to take that long. And I also think that ultimately, whether it's the tropical Pluto return in 2022 or the sidereal Pluto return in 2024, Pluto moves so slowly that unlike a Mercury transit that's a day coming, a day here, and a day going, Pluto transits are 2 or 3 years coming, a couple of years here, and a couple of years going. And I don't have the exact dates. I just know we're in the midst of it.
For people who feel discouraged or afraid, or for people who are just wondering what they can do about all this. Earlier in the comments, someone was saying that they're in a Pluto transit and it's really scary. And
yeah,
what do you say?
Drugs. No, I'm kidding. I know how I've Uranus in my first house. I get to be inappropriate and shocking. No, I don't mean that. I don't mean that at all.
That,
actually. By the way, Julie just posted something about one of my favorite things, which I know we've talked about before here, and I could talk about for hours. But Julie wrote, "The media is the message," and actually, the title of the book is "The Medium is the Message." But the title of the book, although when Marshall McLuhan first wrote this in a book called The Gutenberg Galaxy, Understanding Media, he wrote, "The Medium is the Message." The title of his book, though, was "The Medium is the Massage." And he was a great fan of James Joyce, who was the champion of complex puns and twisting language. And the medium is the massage. Basically, the concept is it doesn't matter what we're watching on TV. It's that we're watching TV that counts. It doesn't matter what we're reading in books. It's that we're reading books. And that with the Gutenberg Galaxy, we entered a period of several centuries where seeing is believing. We were reading books. We were looking at things from a distance and taking reality in with our eyes. And that was the rise of perspective and ideologies and nation states, where everything had distance and perspective. The age of enlightenment, where what man was no longer part of nature, but looked at it. It was from a distance. And McLuhan said that with the rise of radio and television and computers, that and he coined this term, flipped out, meaning that our nervous system is now an exonervous system. Just like a crab has an exoskeleton, we, humanity, now has an exonervous system. And as such, we have de-emphasized the seeing is believing. Wayne what can I say his name? Dyer, sorry, used to say that believing is seeing, because in the tribal culture, and Marshall McLuhan, and the name is not McLaren, it's MC capital HU, capital MC capital LUHAN, Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan said that with the advent of electronic technology, we are now in a post-literate society, humanity is, and that we are no longer literate, we are post-literate, which is actually a re-tribalization. And he claims that the first electronic generation was the TV generation of the 50s that came into age in the 60s, that basically the tribal drums was the music. and that the whole rise of whatever it was that happened in the 60s was a retribalization, think Woodstock, and even now with festivals and so on. And so, yes, Julie, I'm sorry I got sidetracked because what she said is so important. And it's really, I think, ultimately important to understand where we are now, because we've basically externalized our nervous system and our brains. We're like little cells running around inside of a global brain. And with all that, Amanda, I have to admit, I forgot what your question was.
My question was, what do we do? What can we do? I mean, it's so interesting, Rick, what you're saying. Last night, I found myself so frustrated with my daughters because they had spent like I was frustrated with myself for allowing about 3 hours worth of just straight movies, just, movie after movie after movie. And I felt so icky after. And I was like, God, just the onslaught of messages and programming, and
Yeah.
it was just, and I was like, wow, that was just like 3 hours of garbage,
Yeah.
basically.
So,
Yeah.
so I will answer that, but I also want to say one other thing about how things are moving so fast and how it's hard to keep up with change.
Yeah.
And that is, remember, if we look at the United States' chart, just as an example, Pluto was, at a certain position in 1776. Pluto's opposition to that position occurred in 1937. That's like 17, 18, 19. That's like 150 years to get halfway around the cycle. And then its second half of the cycle back to the conjunction is in 2024. In other words, Pluto is moving so fast right now, because its orbit is so lopsided and it gets so close to the sun and farther away. Through the 80s and 90s, Pluto was closer to the sun than Neptune was. A lot of people don't even realize that. Neptune was moving slower than Pluto. And so what that means is that time, aside from as you get older, time seems to speed up, but time really has speeded up because Pluto's moving so damn fast. So what do we do? How do we manage this? Well, there's a few things. Anything that one can do to maintain their sense of balance is a step in the right direction, whether that is yoga, meditation, relaxation, swimming, whether it's a karma yoga where you're actually doing things, engaged in something, that whatever we can do to whether it's psychotherapy, whether it's dance, anything that we can do to help us maintain our balance is a step in the right direction. Secondly, I think of there's this line that I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's something that we've thrown around for a long time. And I always say, as the great Swami said, I don't know who the great Swami was, but as the great Swami said, yard by yard, it's hard. Inch by inch, it's a cinch. And so from that standpoint, I often say that we need to have one eye on the distant future, but we need to have the other eye on the ground where we're taking our next step. In other words, there has to be this sense of paying attention to what's going on and doing what we can do to keep alive. And then maybe the most important thing in all of this is what I would call compassion. And maybe a better word is kindness. Maybe people have an easier time understanding that than some complex thing like compassion. But it basically means seeing things from someone else's point of view and knowing that they're just trying to get by also, even though they may have a terribly different way of looking at reality than you do. And again, ultimately everyone's just trying to be happy, but many people are so afraid that their happiness is projected onto something that someone else is or isn't doing. And therefore we have people who are trying to control other people by preventing them from reading books. I read yesterday that that the most recent victim of Florida's suppression of reading material was that Shakespeare, William Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, has been taken out of all of the libraries and made only available to juniors and seniors in high school because it's considered inappropriate. Now, I don't want to fall down this or any one political rabbit hole. I'm just using this as an example of people who have a fear and therefore try to control it in other people and typically deny it in themselves. And so what do we do for that? We go to therapy. We learn about ourselves. We strive for ways to improve who we are and open up to new ways of thinking about things, knowing that whoever we're relying on for the truth doesn't know. There's no one out there who has a corner on reality that has it all. Whatever, in fact, the more someone is certain about the truth, probably the less they know about it. And this is something that scares the hell out of people. But the bottom line here is that we have to be open to new understandings. And part of that begins with being compassionate and being kind. And that compassion and kindness is not only to other human beings, but it's to animals, it's to the planet, it's to, it's to the cosmos in which we live. Miyamoto has referenced Andre Barbeau, who is probably the first of the modern astrologers who actually looked at the outer planet cycles, which so many of us do now with the advent of computers. It's easy to just hit a button and get every Pluto-Saturn or Saturn-Pluto conjunction in opposition since the birth of Jesus, and begin to assign that to the history that was going on. But Andre Barbeau talked about 2025 being the beginning of a new renaissance, and that goes back to the Uranus to trining Pluto. So I don't know if that answered the question completely. There is no really one simple answer, but but I believe that the answer is facing our own internal fears and learning how to manage and or to dissipate our hate by managing our fears without projecting them onto what others should or shouldn't do. And there is no political party or people that has, although I know that it seems like there is, but I would say that anyone involved in, or most anyone involved in politics in one way or another is trying to suppress someone else. So.
Rick, thank you so much. This has been an awesome deep dive about Pluto. I think that it has given us tons of things to really be with. And like you said, it can take a decade for Pluto to work its magic in our lives. Some of the main things that you brought up here today that I just wanted to summarize. You said an invitation from Pluto is like an invitation from a mafioso Don. There's like you
Did
gotta
I say that really? Oh man,
so
no. Well,
Yeah.
it's the offer you can't refuse,
Exactly.
And
Right.
most of us have been through some sort of plutonic changes in our lives. Although I have to say, when you look at someone's chart and you see where Pluto was when they were born, here's a quick chart interpretation thing. You look at someone's chart and you see where Pluto was when they were born, and then you see where Pluto is now. And the question that you should make in your mind, has Pluto in their lifetime crossed over their sun or moon, or moved opposite their sun or moon? And if so, when? Because those are likely plutonic transitions that not everyone ever gets to experience in a lifetime because Pluto moves so slowly.
Yeah.
Other people, let's say they're born with their sun and moon in Capricorn. And let's say they were born in the 70s or 80s and Pluto was in Scorpio or Sagittarius. That means that person has experienced Pluto transiting over their sun and their moon and maybe even their ascendant. And so some people become old and maybe even hardened, maybe wise, but maybe also fearful by what they've had to face in their life, because this is not about anything that's age dependent. I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love that. I love thinking about Pluto. Which ones of us have Pluto on our dance card in this
Yeah.
lifetime? And
Yeah.
and how do we dance with that? And it seems very intentional that we chose to have Pluto
It
as a
reminds me of a very bad joke, which I'm going to tell anyhow. And this was a man named Emo Phillips, who was a Chicago comedian. He's come and gone. I think he's still around a bit. But he was very he did what's called garden path humor, which he takes you down a road and you find you're somewhere else. And one of his lines, which is absolutely inappropriate, is he used to say, I love going to the park to watch the children dance and play. But of course, they don't know I'm shooting blanks. But that's Pluto in a way that it's like it brings up fear and we respond to it, even though we don't know whether it's true or not, or whether or not we're responding to anything that makes any sense at all. And some people have those experiences. Some people are born with Pluto, with the sun or the moon or the ascendant close conjunction or opposition with Pluto. Some people are born with strong Pluto trines, and they get to do those dances with the hell realms, with death, in a way that seems to be easier for them. Other people can't escape it ever. Other people get it at certain points in their life, but it's neither good nor bad. It can be difficult and it can be a lot, but it's almost like I remember my old astrology buddy partner, Jeff Jower, used to say that he had a Buddhist teacher who said we had it all wrong. And that is, people who have a hard life say they have a hard life because they're being punished for bad karma. And someone who has an easy life and can skate by, oh, I must have led a good life in a past lifetime because I'm being rewarded. Well, his teacher said it was exactly the opposite. When we have, a really, really hard life and we live it exemplary, we're given a harder one. It's like playing a video game and leveling up. If you got a really easy life where you're just cruising, could have been a real asshole your past life, and you're getting a life that's easier so you can do some remedial training. Now, I'm not saying this is the way it is. I'm just saying, when it comes to these outer planet transits like Pluto, we make judgments, but we don't know.
Okay. For those of you who are saying, I just joined, I can't believe I missed this whole thing, I missed the whole live thing, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because when you're subscribed, you should get a notification from YouTube. I'm not sure if you actually have to do something to get notified, but just make sure you're subscribed, and then you'll know when we go live for the Cosmic Connection or any of these other shows. Rick, thank you. I mean, there's so much here, and I love the takeaway that we are each responsible to do the things that help us feel balanced, to practice kindness, to recognize that I like what we brought up too about the hidden enemy here, that it's actually in coming together that we have more power against this, hidden enemy. That
It may have been Helen Keller. I don't remember, but someone said, alone we can do nothing or so little, and together we can do so much.
Yeah.
And that's part of what this is about finding community and making sure that the community we find is a community of kind and compassionate and people who are growing in awareness, not closing down because of fear.
People like you.
Aww.
And people like all these people in our chat, which has been so fun to watch the chat. Thank you everyone for being here. If you haven't yet checked out Rick's classes with us, he has an entire Astrology Foundations suite that is an incredible starting point or revisiting point. Yeah. If you've been studying astrology and you really want to get those foundations solid, and you like Rick's approach, you kind of want to get into the way that he practices astrology because you resonate with the way that he does it. So
Hey, and by the way, before we leave, I should say that there are still a handful of openings for my 10-day retreat in Goa, India, December 6th through the 16th. It's called Initiation into Astrology. It's work that I've done before in groups like this. It's going to be incredible, magical. Go to Heaven and Earth, one word, Heaven and Earth Workshops, all one word, heavenandearthworkshops.com. and there's a day-by-day curriculum and activities on there, and it's going to be fabulous, and it's going to fill up.
Yay. Awesome. Yes. Go hang out
You're
with
coming, aren't you, Amanda?
what's
Nah.
I don't know.
I'll
It
give
sounds
you a
good.
good deal.
Yeah. 2 kids, astrology hub, living in Hawaii. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are making it a little challenging. But as far as what Rick just said about community and being around kind people, and I mean, I personally believe that people who are interested in understanding the mysteries of the cosmos and are exploring these things, why are we here? What's the point of all this? That you're going to find some amazing people to hang out with. So yes, go to India and hang out with Rick and some really cool people and learn some amazing things. Someone else in the comments also said, I would really love to have my chart done. So if you haven't yet gone to Astrologer Connect, which is our reading platform where we have some amazing astrologers that you can book readings with, go check that out. That's astrologyhub.com/connect. Rick made a cameo appearance on Astrologer Connect.
I'll be back. I'll be back.
Yes. How was that for you?
It was great. It was great. It was a lot of fun. And the people who I connected with, I got emails from most of them, just thanking me, and it was good. It was really good. And as you know from the chart extravaganzas that we've done, the chart interpretations that we've done, that we have another one coming up in November. That it's something that I don't get to do enough of, and I love doing, and I'm good at it. So it's a lot of fun. And so, keep your eye out. There'll be an email if you're on the list from Amanda saying, hey, Rick's going to be on tomorrow from blah, blah, blah to when. And I don't know.
All I had to do was put one post in our inner circle members.
Kept me busy.
It kept you busy, and people, it was almost like it broke the system. Like people were trying to get on all at the same time. So I'm really happy to hear that you're going to do another cameo.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. It was a lot of fun.
Good. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in for this deep dive about Pluto. And we look forward to connecting with you. The next Cosmic Connection is going to be our August forecast.
Yeah.
So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You'll get a notification when we go live. And also, like what Rick just said, if you do want to be notified when Rick is doing a cameo appearance on Astrologer Connect, which, by the way, he has like a 3-year waiting list for readings. So being able to like jump the line and actually connect with him live is definitely a treat. Make sure that you're signed up for our newsletter. That's astrologyhub.com/insider. And you'll get lots of other cool goodies with that. So
thank you, Amanda, as always. You're my favorite interviewer, although sometimes I don't think I even let you ask the questions. But you reflect myself back to me in ways that really make me think, and I really appreciate that about you.
Oh, that's so sweet. But in the beginning, you told me I'm not the only one.
No, but you're the best.
Oh, there we go. All right, I'll take it. Okay, everybody, take care, and we will catch you on the next episode.